Hello, welcome to the Dublin Conversations. Ben, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Andy. I'm Ben Caspersz. I'm the founder and managing director of an agency called Claremont, based in central London. I've had 25 years in the agency game, started in consumer PR, moved into more public sector PR. In the last 10 years, I've pushed into behavioural science and behavioural insight with a smattering of co-design. That's me.
You're welcome there, Ben. Well, let's begin our journey, our 5 steps to Dublin. We're taking through what we call the Dublin window. So step one is that using the analogy of like the early astronomers who created very elaborate descriptions of our universe, but fundamentally wrong. The Dublin Conversation believes we need a new, bigger, wider, deeper framework of thinking to guide anyone working in the communications industry and beyond to help them do their jobs better, but also be more purposeful. And we suggest that at the center of the universe is really this idea of purpose. And after, say, breathing, eating, using your senses, one of the most critical human functions is about how you manage perceptions of your future behaviors, how you, and the word confidence not in a sort of meaning self-confidence, but confidence in a reliable expectation that what you perceive will be a reality. And so step one is that you need to create confidence in your character and authentic purpose and purposefulness within yourself and with others by managing perceptions around your future behaviors. And an authentic purpose and purposefulness makes it easier to create confidence by being more coherent and compelling. I just wonder any thoughts on this step, Ben?
I'm really pleased that you've put it as step one. I wonder if it could be anything else that could be at step one. To have that intentionality as a first step makes perfect sense.
And we then move on to a sort of step two, where we say that in order to socially interact with others, you've essentially got 5 strategic choices. And you may recognize this as an evolution from the PESO model used in the communications industry of paid, earned, shared and owned. But there's some substantive difference. And the key one is that whereas PESO defines channels of how you reach, these are choices. And furthermore, that the own is not just own media channels, but your own existence, your own being, your own reputation. Just spending time with someone can be a way of earning earning trust and building your reputation. And so, own is a much more extensive dimension than just media channels. And we introduced the dimension of nudge about the choice architecture as a range of strategic choices. And so this, we believe, it frames the range available to you in how you choose to interact. I wonder any thoughts there, Ben?
It's a very useful evolution. I'm particularly happy to see nudge in there.
Yeah.
This is the word nudge is actually recently taken a bit of a beating during COVID times. There were lots of questions raised about its ethical dimensions, but it ought to be in there. It's really a nod to using design and choice architecture in particular as an option in the midst of the other PESO choices. So I'm really pleased to see that in there.
When you mentioned about ethical choices, what's your response to people who may say that nudge strategies may be immoral or enable people to be exploited? What would be your response to those sort of criticisms?
It does create more opportunities for unethical behavior than perhaps the other channels, but it's not all the other channels can be abused, can fall short when it comes to consent, but nudge in particular can have less consent than the others, because a lot of the nudges are done in a stealthy and hidden way. But I do think the reason that it's in the spotlight in the moment in such a negative way is more to do with the curve of adoption, that it had its initial phase of being hot and glitzy and everyone wanted to do it. And during COVID, I think it just went through a trough of disappointment and a trough of falling short of the heady expectations that had been laid out before it. And hopefully, actually, now it will start to settle into a steady state. So I think the criticisms are fair enough, but I think that it will settle down now.
So we're sort of describing really a maturing understanding of how to manage and use that dimension. And certainly within the Dublin conversations, there might be one school who would argue you shouldn't use nudge, whereas I think that we think that's perhaps unrealistic, but rather if you can enable people to be better consumers and users of nudge, that's the way to best minimize abuse and so on.
It's
Okay,
a
let's
funny
move on.
word, nudge, Andy. This is the thing, that nudge is it's a funny word. It is the language isn't necessarily helpful. The semantics of it are not necessarily helpful, and I wonder whether there might be a better word to do with design or something. But splitting hairs really. I just think that it's become a bit of a lightning rod word for people who just are worried about ethics.
Do you have any suggestions, Ben, for an alternative to nudge and maybe a different letter in our acronym there?
Well, it's not as elegant, but we tend to use the language of behavioural design rather than of nudge. In fact, we had a bit of a purge of nudge in our own, the way we describe our work in our company, because it was just becoming a distraction. And actually, probably a more technical, accurate description of the same thing is behavioural design. But I would be loath to spend too much time changing it. I think people understand what you've got here, and you should just carry on.
And it makes a lousy acronym as well. So let's move on. Let's move on to step 3. And so this is a model developed by Professor Gareth Loudon of Imperial College London, and it's an elegantly simple description, really, of the creative process in that you listen, connect, do. Do you listen in every sense of the word, using all your senses? You then take on board new information and data. You connect that with new things, and do could be a development of an idea as much as its execution and making it tangible in some ways. And then it's a constant moving strip of a loop feedback. So you listen again, connect, do, listen again. And where purpose in at the heart of it is like the engine, the heart that pumps it. And the argument would be that the more stronger the purpose, the more vibrant the listening, connect, doing. And also that at this stage, really, that we recognize the significance of emergence, that our world and our world is shaped not by deliberate design, but by emergence from its environment. And so there's a number of dimensions there. Firstly, that sociologists can now do experiments to establish almost universal laws of human behavior, one of which is that 2 out of 3 people will help a stranger, which also means 1 out of 3 don't. So it's not to pass moral judgment, but to recognize that fundamental of human instinct. And we believe that that leads us really to 2 instincts that drive our listening, connect, doing, which is one of what we call we-led, where your instinct is to think of the collective group interest first, and me-led, where you think of self-interest first. And obviously that's shaped by context. So if you're facing an urgent situation, urgent crisis, there may be a tendency to be more me-led. But nonetheless, these 2 dimensions provide 2 powerful impulses of instincts guiding how we operate. And another element that's emerged is the label comms. And the Dublin conversations believes we need a new framework with a new label to describe a bigger field of operation that goes beyond existing terms of advertising, communications, public relations, journalism, behavior change, and so on. And we believe then that there's a new label for that, and a possible contender could be this word comms. So just wondering your thoughts there about the listening, connect, doing, the we-led and me-led, and this idea maybe of a need for a label and a suggested candidate of comms.
We use comms. We use comms and engagement, but comms is the shorthand, and I would endorse that. I'm pleased to see the emphasis on instincts. You mentioned it several times, and trying to get to work with instincts as a real thing. But the most significant thing I observe here is this accommodation of we-led thinking. I wonder, Andy, if this is the step where things like co-production and co-design come into it, where we start to do things using participative design, collaborative design, of bringing people in to so that we can accommodate different needs, requirements, viewpoints, instead of just making it from just the individual agency or the individual client. It becomes something which is a shared endeavor, which is how I understand we-led thinking to be. Our practice has really moved on in the last few years to lean on co-design and co-production as a mindset and as a method. And I'm really pleased that if I understand it right, that here in step 3 is where we're really starting to roll with that.
So why is it so important about co-creation and co-production? Why does it sort of signal a significant potential better way ahead for the industry, do you think?
There's lots of reasons, but there are two that stand out. One is that you can make your work more effective, that by bringing in a wider range of data, viewpoints, experiences, expertise, angles, that you're going to get you've got more in the pot, you've got a broader consideration, and therefore the output is going to be that much more complete. But the second side of it is about integrity and about it being the right thing to do. By following the process which is inclusive, accessible, open for a wider range of people to take part in, it gives greater validation and credibility to the output. So if we're doing something, for example, targeting a specific community, at the moment we're working with one of our pieces of work around young mums from disadvantaged background. By actually including young mums from a disadvantaged background in our team, paying them actually to participate and give their expertise, what we're coming out with at the end is something that is going to work because it's had their expertise driven into it. But also when we take it to market, as it were, we can tell the story of how it came to be. And that gives it extra welly, frankly, and gives it extra credibility amongst an audience who are pretty skeptical about most communications. They've got a very keen antennae for BS and for things that might patronize them. And when they realize that this has been made by mums, for mums, it puts it on a different level. So the reason is effectiveness and credibility.
So really what seems to be suggesting there that this approach offers what might be called a bottom-up led rather than top-down, and with dividends of being more effective and sustainable and scalable they're going forward.
Exactly. And I think that if one criticism of the traditional way that people have done comms is it is very top-down and actually elitist for it, and it doesn't get the benefit of a wider range of experience, in particular lived experience. So it's missing something. It's not just comms. If you look at behavioral science as well, that is also guilty of being too top down and not getting the benefit of lived experience either. And so in our practice, we're trying to fuse those things together and get the best of all worlds, really, and not just do things from the center or from the top.
Just maybe on point there, there seems to be a sort of inference then that sort of they've got behavioural science and this separate thing of comms. The Dublin conversations is suggesting that comms is maybe like the word for the big umbrella that covers everything. Just any thoughts there at all, Ben, rather than seeing, as I say, a silo alongside behavioural sciences?
I think I probably misspoke, to be honest. I think that I was referring to behavioural scientists tend to be top down. But I do endorse what you're doing here, trying to get an umbrella that brings all the threads together whether it's behavioral science or design or creative or anything else. I think it's a good thing to do to get a term like that. I'm not 100% convinced by comms. I think it's not plain English enough for me, but it does work on another level.
Yeah. Okay, fine, but let's go move on to the next step then. Again, this is very much influenced by behavioural science and particularly the work of Professor Daniel Kahneman, where having identified your purpose, recognise you've got 5 strategic open choices and that you listen, connect, do to what emerges, then the 5 goals really frame what you need to achieve. And Kahneman identified that we're emotionally driven animals, but if you identify what he calls 5 heuristics or rules of thumb, being known or noticed, liked, trusted, front of mind, and being talked about, there's an effective way of engaging with others. And we, at the Dublin conversation, believe actually this frames any campaign, any work, any operation that in order to successfully socially interact with other people, you need to sort of identify these sort of and be successful in these 5 goals. Just wonder any thoughts there, Ben?
They're really excellent. I think this is a really useful addition and useful kind of scaffolding for laying out your aims. I initially looked at it and I thought, where does the word understood go in here? Is that a separate one? Should I challenge you and say, it's a 6th one? Actually, it's a means to an end. It's not being understood is not actually an outcome in its own right. It's actually a means to get into these 5 things. So I would leave it as it is. Yeah, it looks great.
Could maybe being understood be a subset, a dimension of known, that you understood, you know of, I'm known for, and so on, possibly as a way of including that?
I think actually, and in my own opinion would be that in order to be known, in order to even be liked or trusted, you need to be understood. Let's take an example. Let's look at perceptions of immigrants.
Yeah.
A lot of the time they are misunderstood and people just don't understand, and they don't get to talk to immigrants and be around immigrants an awful lot, and that's when they often are not trusted or are not liked. Once people actually understand them and hang out with them and realize how much we've got in common and so on, then these things happen, these outcomes, being liked and trusted and front of mind and so on, happen in a positive way. So I think I would stand by that for the moment. Being understood is a bridging thing, and it's not an outcome in its own right. It's a means, it's a way of getting to these, which are substantive outcomes.
It's an interesting point there, but so perhaps it could be a subset of confidence. So being understood and comprehended, I've got confidence that I know of these people and can coexist, cooperate, or collaborate as appropriate with my degree of level of confidence, perhaps. I think that's a fascinating point there, Ben. Thank you. And it's certainly one of the big dimensions of the Dublin conversation, our work, is that one of our outcomes is really to better understand our known unknowns. So that could perhaps rank alongside that there. And lastly, step 5 is that the current communications industry very much operates through a sort of 2-way communications of listen and engaging. And perhaps the Dublin conversation believes there maybe should be a 3rd dimension, that it's not just how you interact with another person or another group or stakeholder and so on, but also you've got a responsibility to replenish the wider social fabric of trust, togetherness, and being able to come together to tackle critical challenges. And the Dublin conversation believes that our society faces critical issues of growing distrust, growing social division. And so this idea that you don't just do comms, if that's used as a label to describe this big umbrella of activity, but also maybe the idea of regenerative comms, that you seek to achieve added value in any social interaction to replenish. Just wondering your thoughts on that, Ben?
Well, I think it's impossible to disagree. Who would not want to do this, to replenish and do more added value through our day-to-day work? However, my challenge would be, is it a little bit abstract, ephemeral? I'm a practitioner first and foremost, not an academic, and my instinct is we've got enough on our plate, Andy, just making sure we don't break anything, making sure that we deliver, making sure that we do all these other things that we've touched upon here and do all these things right. I would like to do this, and it's good that people like yourself through these conversations are putting it on the table, but in practice, day to day, as someone in a commercial environment, I would find it hard to even think about this stuff all that much. It needs to, if it were to happen, it needs to become like a reflex. It needs to become a thing that is defaulted in through the design of what we do. I mean, in a way, government is trying to do that. We work with public sector clients. They're trying to embed a social value piece to everything that they commission. So in a way, they are trying to say, let's while we work, create some extra good beyond the actual core work itself. Let's just put it back better than it was when you found it, kind of thing. So I think that they are trying to systematize it in that way. So maybe I'm being a little bit over doubtful about it. So I think it's a good thing, but I'm such a practical person. I don't know how it works in practice in my day-to-day stuff, unlike the other things that you've shown me today.
I think, as I say, the idea of these conversations is to critique so I'm just wondering there, Ben, that one of the dividends from this is really to establish it as part of one's mindfulness, that one in an age of growing hyper attention and diminishing bandwidths, there's possibly a real danger that people can become over focused and as a consequence accentuate me-led thinking, and therefore like regenerative comms, your instinctive response there, seemingly very much someone very much embedded within a we-led a perspective and a approach to the world. So I'm just wondering whether there could be a potential dividend there that, yes, it's not on at the table, and that really makes a fundamental point. Well, perhaps we're doing it, that it needs to be on the table, at least mindful of, and maybe if not in every instance immediately applied, at least, sort of brings it in the spectrum of range of thinking, being mindful of, and also being accountable to, so that, as I say, at least every so often you may reflect, actually, I could be more on that aspect. But it puts on the
it has
table,
got me
perhaps.
thinking that there was something that came up in a conversation recently with another agency owner. She's a real visionary. She introduced me to the idea of what she called slow comms, slow communications, and she expressed it as an idea analogous to slow food.
Yeah.
In the last few years, we've got our heads around the fact that actually slow food, where you serve things up simply, it's done in a way that is got it's got a greater good to it, a replenishment angle on the food. It's not just fast, it's not just tasty, it has been done with slowly, with great care, in a way that has actually benefited the farmers and the land and everything else. That is a relatively new thing in food, but has gone mainstream now. You can see evidence of people trying to show off their slow food credentials, even in big food. And she was trying to make the case that maybe there's a case for slow comms, and that actually, through our practice, we could offer up a way of working where clients and other stakeholders accept that things might take a bit longer, they might cost a bit more, but we will get more replenishment through it. For example, she was working in a city outside of London, and she said, look, I'm going to offer my clients the chance, when I do a project in a town, let's say I'm working in Aylesbury, where I would commit, because of my commitment to slow comms, to making the campaign in Aylesbury made by Aylesbury companies. We'd have an Aylesbury graphic designer, we'd have an Aylesbury event company. I would resist the temptation to go to my normal suppliers in London or wherever, and I would offer that to them, but they would have to give me more rope, more time to do that. Just like a punter in a restaurant would be happy to give the chef. Hang on 1 second. You'd have to.
You're interacting with your wider community.
Real life. Just like a punter in a restaurant would give the chef and the patron more miles and more time to serve up a bowl of food that was they knew was slow food. And so it's a different mindset where you're putting replenishment as a priority, but you're asking, if I'm going to deliver replenishment through the work, I'm going to need a few things from my stakeholders as well, not least resources.
Firstly, my immediate response is that's a wonderful metaphor, and secondly, it's prompting me. Like, I'm looking at our visuals there, that actually they could perhaps exist on a vertical spectrum as opposed to horizontal, and that there's perhaps a potential for another dimension of time, like fast and slow. Therefore, that could like maybe manifest. As I say, lovely idea of slow comms that's much more deeper embedded. As I say, I always get frustrated. People say we haven't got time to do these things, but then they've always got time to have to redo it or put it right because it didn't work. The fast thing didn't work first time.
It's not going to work all the time. There are many times where you're going to need to just hit the deadline and get it done. But some of the time it might work.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And I think,
for example, Andy, we worked with Grenfell Tower. We did as you know, we did some work there, and that was an occasion where I think a slow comms approach was very fitting. There was no room for people like me to come in there like this. When you're dealing with that type of super nuanced, delicate, sensitive, trauma-driven situation, a slow comms approach was entirely appropriate. And so I think some of this language of regenerative replenishment and slowness is helpful for people to see that you have options. You don't need to default to the kind of drive it through deadline driven thing, doing it as cheaply and quickly as we can, which is how we've done it. To have a wider repertoire, to have a different choices available to us in that way is helpful. And I think that's what you're doing with this conversation, is showing people that there are perhaps wider considerations and wider choices available to you. So I think it is useful.
And I think what we're revealing here is a bigger framework of thinking that shows you, pardon the food analogy, a bigger menu of choices that again immediately prompts the mind. It got a spectrum of wham bam to slow comms, which are the fabulous insight there. Lastly, really, so we've gone through the 5 steps. It's a process that can enable people to step outside existing silos of advertising, communication, behaviour change, public relations. How do you feel about looking at your world, and what does better look like?
It's lovely. I've already said I think it's healthy and worthwhile. I wouldn't, again, I run a business and I wouldn't like to be doing it too much. But when I do this kind of work, this kind of put your head up, take a look around, I think this is the sort of thing that the best way to use that time to do it in this way. What I like about it is step by step. It's structured. It's not just a big vomit or a big swirl of things. I like the fact that you also have an open posture. You're genuinely, it's a conversation, not a guideline. And you're genuinely want input. You've structured it that way. I mean, this is really the ultimate in co-production. So yeah, great.
I bet. Is there anything like one or more that the Dublin conversation should be doing different, you think?
It's so important, I think, to put your outputs into an easy to digest, accessible form. And I think there's a lot to it. And my do differently is maybe not do differently, maybe do as well, is to make sure that there are certain edits of it where you've got to you chuck out a load of stuff and just focus on one bit, because it's a lot to take in. I mean, I've 25 years experience and I'm into this stuff, and I still find it there's a lot there. I think it would benefit from being chunked up a bit and made super simple to make it open to more people.
Yeah, excellent. And so any specific action steps would you suggest or recommend or advise?
Just what I've said, actually. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, listen, Ben, massive thanks. I really appreciate it. I'll stop the recording now, and thank you for this fabulous and enlightening Dublin conversation. Thank you, Ben.
Pleasure. I've enjoyed it.